one of them, it's probably the 14th.
Is anyone running against Jim Jordan in the fourth? I feel like
Yes,
he's
yeah.
so in the sort of Trump circle, and I know a lot of people don't like him, but I don't know what the chances are that he'll be voted out.
Yeah, a former teachers union president is running against Jim Jordan. I'm
Mm.
trying to think of her name right now. She ran against Jim Jordan back in 16 also. Oh geez, I don't know if either of the other one of you guys know her name. I cannot think of it off the top of my head. Retired teacher, former union president. She's a pretty strong candidate. I mean, Ohio's weird because while we do have a good amount of media markets here, it's if you live outside of like the main city in your media market, you don't get as much attention. So I mean, a big hub in that district is Lorraine County, and that's where she's from. So like they don't really get
Okay.
Cleveland news out there too much to cover their
Mm.
campaign
Is that
or anywhere else.
Janet Garrett?
Yes, Janet Garrett, that's her name.
Yeah.
So, talking about the Ohio 4th is probably a good segue into gerrymandering.
Mm-hmm.
If you've never looked at a map of Ohio congressional districts, you should go and do so. Maybe we'll put a link to a map up on our website. These districts are just crazy looking. It wasn't until, well, really until the past year or so that I spent much time looking at the maps, but I was trying to figure out for my parents and for a lot of my other relatives who still live in Ohio who their congressmen were. And I realized that, these, like the Ohio 16th is just a bizarre looking district if you know anything about the counties and areas that it includes. And realizing that, my aunt who lives really far away from my parents, but somehow still has the same congressperson, but then the people who live like practically across the street from my parents have someone else, and seeing the way these districts have been drawn was shocking, let's say. So, are there groups in Ohio that are working to think about gerrymandering and what can be done about that?
Yeah, this is Lorraine. I'm working with Fair Districts Ohio. We're actually circulating petitions to a proposal on the ballot for 2018. It's a proposed constitutional amendment that we want to bring before the voters to go back to bring the map that was approved by 72% of the voters in 2015. We actually had a vote on the ballot back then, and 72% of voters voted for this. Right now, we actually within our group have people circulating petitions. I have people coming over to my house all this week to sign petitions. There is a big effort to get this on the ballot and get these districts back to where they used to be, resembling some level of fairness and representing communities a little bit better. The worst thing about this gerrymandered map is that, like you said, it takes me an hour and a half almost to get to my congressman's office, which I've made that trip many times now in the last year. But that community is not necessarily, we're not necessarily concerned about the same things. We're not the same community. There are different demographics and socioeconomic issues and concerns in between Parma and Canton. And so it really does slice and dice up communities and create sort of walls around these communities that removes the connection. And we're working really hard to get that done. We need to get all of our signatures in by July 5th. So it's a massive effort that we're taking.
If people wanted to get involved in that, is there a place we can direct them to help if they're inside Ohio, where they should look to get more information about that?
Absolutely. If you're in Ohio, just go to fairdistrictsohio.org, and there's lots of information, and you can search for someone who is circulating petitions in your area. They have a site locator on there so that you can find someone who's got petitions for you to sign, or if you would like to volunteer to circulate petitions yourself, you can also pick up petitions. There's a really quick training that you can do. There's a YouTube video and a lot of information on their website, so it's actually pretty easy to get up to speed and start circulating petitions yourself and collecting signatures. And we definitely welcome the help.
I'm going to send my mom over to your house.
Oh, great. You'll find me on the website. So.
Gerrymandering is only one of the ways in which people are concerned that voters are being suppressed in Ohio. one really important case before the Supreme Court of the United States this year is Husted versus the Philip Randolph Institute. It is a test of whether Ohio's current voter roll purges are legal. And if so, that could open the door for Ohio's process of purging their voter rolls to be used by other states. Ohio has a process where if you don't vote for, I think it's for 2 years, the state sends you a confirmation notice that says you're going to be unregistered. And if the voter doesn't respond to that notice and also doesn't vote over another few more years, Ohio removes you from the list of registered voters. So what do we think about the Supreme Court case, and do you all see any sort of voter suppression from this method of removing people from the voter rolls or from other methods?
So this is Lorraine again. I actually just recently had an experience with someone within my group who was trying to figure out which district she was in. And she did not vote in the last election, and because no one excited her, she said, and we got her now, so I'm not going to worry about the past. But she discovered that she was no longer registered to vote, and she was trying to, figure out how that happened. She said, I know I'm registered to vote. That doesn't make sense. And in looking into it, we could see her voter data, drop off. And so I told her she had to re-register. But so here was somebody, in my group who wasn't excited about the last presidential election. She didn't like any of the candidates. So she abstained from voting, and then or at least this is the story, was that she was purged from the voter rolls because she had probably received a postcard and ignored it. Apparently the postcard is difficult for some people to understand too, and they're not really sure why they're, being asked to verify their address. This issue is actually really concerns me personally, because I don't believe any kind of voter suppression. I think we need to make it easier for more people to vote. We shouldn't be making it harder for people to vote. We shouldn't be dropping people from voter registration rolls for something like not voting. And the National Voter Registration Act protects your right to vote, regardless of whether or not you actively use that right. So it doesn't really make any sense to me how Ohio has gotten away with this for so long. And I think that if this, if this passes or if this ruling finds in favor of Husted practice, this is going to set a really dangerous precedent for a lot of other states that are already actively looking for ways to stifle some, to quiet some voices and to take away people's right to vote. I think this is dangerous territory we're in. I don't know really how they've gotten away with this for so long.
Yeah, I agree with Lorraine. It's completely inexcusable. Like you can't explain to me one way or another why this is something that is needed by the state of Ohio. I mean, if you voted in 2012 and then you didn't go back to the polls again until 2016, and you're removed from the rolls, which didn't happen in every county, which was weird. I don't know if it was just like certain counties that they went after or what, but if you didn't vote in 12, but you went to vote in 16 and you couldn't vote, that's a massive that's massive voter fraud, in my opinion. Yeah, I have a lot of good feelings that the Supreme Court will come down the right way on this. I mean, I know the court's not necessarily balanced in our favor, but I feel like this is just pretty egregious what John Huston's been doing.
Yeah, I agree.
And just anecdotally, fun fact, it's actually really hard to unregister yourself in Ohio. I've been trying to unregister myself and my husband from Ohio since 2012 because we're registered to vote in Madison, where we live in Wisconsin. And I still got one of those cards. I'm like, I've sent 3 separate applications to, including a handwritten letter. So apparently they only want to unregister people who don't want to be unregistered.
Sophie, that's funny. A great friend of mine moved out to State College, PA, a few years ago. And after she was there for a few months and she had registered to vote, she gets a letter from John Huston saying that she needed to unregister from Ohio, which I thought was very, very odd. But yeah, that's really interesting to me that you are having trouble unregistering to vote.
I got that same letter, and it was frustrating because I had already sent twice when we moved here, and then before 2016, I had already sent in 2 separate requests to remove me from the voter rolls in Ohio, and I still got this letter. And I'm like, well, okay, I should have already been removed because I don't live there. So
obviously it's being applied inconsistently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sophie, if they knew you were a Democrat, they would have removed you.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I think this is Lorraine again. I think that what I really don't understand about this issue is that there really is no need for this process, because if someone does pass away, there's a whole process that is alerted by that happen. Your Social Security and everything. There's sort of a chain of events that happens, and all the necessary agencies are notified in one way or another. I mean, and you can pull from the Social Security database, and they get reports of who has passed away. So that's easy enough to pull those people out of the voter rolls. And when people move, like you did, you try to change your address. You get a driver's license in your new home state, and that should also trigger a chain of events that would make it easy to remove those people from the voter rolls. So there really isn't a good justification for doing what they're doing, other than trying to suppress voter rights. I mean, there really just doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. There's just no good reason for this.
And Ohio is also in both Crosscheck and ERIC, which are two different systems that try to verify that people are not registered in more than one place. I won't go into those in detail because we've talked about those on a previous episode, but you should all be working to get yourselves out of Crosscheck.
Yeah.
Especially since Ohio is already in ERIC, which it's paying to be in, so there's no reason to be in both. But because of that, there's especially no reason to be overly aggressive in removing people from voter rolls.
Exactly.
All right, so I think the last big question we wanted to touch on a little bit is sort of what are the big issues for Ohioans right now. We've talked about the opioid crisis, which of course is one of them. From what I know from people in Ohio, it seems that the economy is also big. Manufacturing was always very important in Ohio, steel mills, and a lot of communities, including around where I grew up, have been hit pretty hard by that. So what are the industries that are in Ohio right now? Are there things that are coming in? Are there places that are still really struggling? Ohio, of course, is losing residents. It lost 2 electoral votes in 2010, and it's on course right now to lose another one in 2020 when the census is redone. If there's actually anyone running the Census Bureau by that point. Is the loss of population in part because of the economic situation, and what else are people worried about right now in Ohio?
This is Eli. I think this issue here plays in a big part of why we're losing electoral votes. But again, I mentioned earlier that Ohio is rural, and I think a dominating industry, especially in Northeast Ohio, is the agricultural industry. And there's a lot more farmers coming in, and a lot more plantations in different little sectors with the farm industry going up. But we're losing, like I mentioned earlier, the millennial vote, and those big populations of kids and a lot of families who aren't and don't have any affiliation with farming are moving out of Ohio. So I think that industry is huge. I know there's a lot of other ones that you guys can touch on, but I think that's also plays in effect why we're losing our electoral votes and why we're losing population.
It's interesting to me that so many millennials leave Ohio because Ohio has so many colleges and universities. You would think, I mean, at least in my experience, a lot of people, when they graduate from college, they tend to sort of stay in the area for a little while. So I'm surprised that Ohio is losing so many millennials. I wonder if there's a way to sort of tap into that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say to that point, there's some movement within Ohio too. So I think when I was growing up, I remember Cleveland always being the biggest city, and now Columbus is the biggest city. And that sort of matches my experience that I grew up in Stark County, but nearly everyone I know who grew up with me in Stark County, who's still in Ohio, lives in or near Columbus. That a lot of them went to Ohio State, and then they just stayed around Columbus. And there wasn't really anything for them to return to in Stark County, especially, a lot of them have jobs in things like IT or in higher education. And so they just stayed around the Columbus area. And I think that's part of the reason that Columbus in particular has grown. There's movement outside of the state, but there's also movement within the state to the bigger cities, especially Columbus.
Yeah, I would say it's hard to be a professional